All right, good morning, folks, and welcome back to Wilderness Wargaming. Today I'm going to talk about Part 3 in the Sisters series, specifically about my custom order for the Sisters of Battle, the Silver Chalice, how I picked them out, why I decided to do a custom order, and how I developed the paint scheme. So we're going to get right into it here on Wilderness Wargaming. Now, I'm kind of a serial army collector. I have, depending on how you look at it, possibly as many as 8 different armies. I have Drakari, Craft Worlds, a little bit of Harlequins, Custodians, Space Marines, Night Lords, and of course the Sisters. And then you can also take the Eldari and make the Inari out of them. So that's really kind of another army there too. And most of these are factions that are well established and known in the game already. So I have Night Lords, I have Shadow Keepers for the Custodians, I have Salamanders, I have Bieltan. Now, my Drakari are custom, but I don't really play the Drakari. A significant portion are much older models from about 20 years ago or more, and I don't really play them. All I really want them for now is so my daughter can play them so I can use them in the Inari. And that's really the only reason I have Harlequins as well. I just have a few to perform a very small combat patrol with the Craft Worlds or Drakari, and to be a small component of an Inari list. But all my other ones are well-known factions. Now, part of the reason that I've selected these factions is that none of them are poster boy factions. I'm not a big fan of factions like the Ultramarines or the Black Legion that tend to get all of the attention, be the central faction. So when I was looking at creating a Sisters list, I kind of didn't want to go with Order of Our Martyred Lady. I wasn't thrilled with their mechanics either, but the fact that they, at the time, were getting almost all of the attention was really a big turnoff to me, even though their paint scheme is actually not too bad, and I don't think their mechanics are exactly terrible. Looking at the other ones, Sacred Rose, I didn't like anything about it, either the white paint, the mechanics, or the lore. Valorous Heart seemed like it was going to be pretty strong mechanically in the 8th edition version of the Codex, and I like their paint scheme. It's fairly elegant, but I don't like their lore at all. They're a little too over the top with the pain and suffering. Ebon Chalice, I like their lore, but I do not like their paint scheme very much at all. And then in the last two, Argent Shroud, I like their paint scheme. Silver looks pretty good. And I like a lot of their lore, but I do not like the Vow of Silence thing. It just comes across to me as silly that you're fighting on the battlefield without any communications. As for Bloody Rose, I was not and remained kind of not a fan of their lore because they're just a little bit too angry. They almost come across like they're trying to be the world eaters in the form of nuns, and it's a bit over the top. I do like their paint scheme now more than I did at the time, especially now that I've seen big armies of them painted that bright red. It looks better than I originally thought it did, so it's grown on me. But I'm still a little bit averse to them, and they have kind of gotten a pseudo poster girl effect in my mind by seeming to get all the good relic, warlord trait, custom stratagem, that sort of thing. Now, in the 8th edition Codex, you could find a few examples of Order Minoris paint schemes. I don't believe there are any in the 9th edition Codex, certainly not as prominently featured. And when I was looking through them, the one that I really hit on was the Order of the Glowing Chalice, which is the Order Minoris that corresponds to Ebon Chalice. Now, of course, there are many more Orders Minoris, but that's the example one, and which one it was clearly keyed off of in that Codex. I really like theirs. They had kind of a dark gray rather than outright silver paint scheme, darker off-red and off-white capes, which I liked a lot, and I liked the weapons being white. And what I did was I took that paint scheme and I adapted it slightly, making the gray more silver, kind of a darker silver than what Argent Shroud has, and keeping the rest of it for the most part, but making a few subtle adaptations here and there. I went to more of a burgundy color rather than the actual off-red. Now, I did like some of the color schemes that the other Orders Minoris had. I really liked the Order of the Thorn and the Order of the Wounded Heart. Both of them have really nice color schemes. An off-white that's probably much easier to paint than the pure white of the Sacred Rose, and a darker red. But I ultimately decided not to go with either of them, and that's because I was able to tie the paint scheme with the lore I developed. Now, one other problem I wanted to solve was that I liked a lot of the orders, different rules, and certain aspects of them, and I wanted to be able to play as different orders and try them out, but I didn't want to be tied to one. That was another attraction of custom orders, that you can play with the rules of any order. But I also didn't want to just be cheesy and pick whichever one was the meta at any given time, so I wanted to come up with a reason why this order might have different rules at different times. And that required a little bit of janking around with the lore as well to create a justification for this. The lore I developed was, I started working on it in 8th edition, but the 9th edition codex really brought it home for me, what I needed to do to make it the army one that I really felt like I owned and wanted to play. And what that was that I did not like that a lot of the orders were written almost as if the writer had forgotten that these are normal human females. They are not superhuman beings like Space Marines. And also, in the 9th edition codex, when the writers were writing the Dogmata, they seemed to forget a lot about the Repentia and how they worked and what their motivations were. Rather than being a voluntary action that the sisters undertake when they make a mistake, a serious mistake, and get in trouble, and do that to atone for their sin or die trying, they became essentially victims of an arbitrary finding of fault by the Dogmata, which didn't seem to have any limiting factor on it. And I did a whole video on this, so I won't go into too much detail, but I didn't like that because it changed the character of the sisters from deeply faithful and wanting to do the best thing for their order and for the Emperor in and of themselves to being afraid of essentially whoever was the most massive Karen in their order and could arbitrarily throw them into chains for basically missing too many bolter shots or something like that. Or so it seems. The blurb in that codex seems to have almost been tossed off carelessly. What I did was that I designed a way that they could use Repentia in a different way, where they were not taken out of the order itself, but rather were into the order. And what I came up with was this. I started to think, how would an order be created where it had a history with more than one order majoris? And also, how is it that it would separate its Repentia from this punishment-driven motivation where they're thrown into chains by the Dogmata? So what I came up with was basically the idea that they originate on a planet called Hibernicus 5. And that was a shrine world that also had a very large Scala Progenium. And Scala Progenium, where orphans are schooled, are the source for most of the Sororitas, not just the Order's militant. As a result, being a shrine world and doing this, they had a large force of sisters that conducted the defense of the world, but fairly limited other military assets. And then they ended up getting attacked by orcs. Well, the problem that they ran into was because this shrine world was shared amongst many orders, two orders majoris, the Ebon Chalice and Argent Shroud, being the most significant, but numerous orders minoris, that initially the defense was very haphazard because each order was fighting essentially as an individual, not coordinated well with the others. And they took horrendous casualties early on. Finally, no order was really in shape to continue fighting on its own, and in desperation, the senior canonist from the Order of the Ebon Chalice took over the whole thing and basically formed them into a single organization. And she made the rather controversial decision to begin recruiting women from the local population and bringing them in if they were willing to fight. In order to avoid risk of contamination with the unfaithful, even on Shrine World, she went to her dogmatas and asked them to develop tests to determine which women were suitable. And they came up with 3 tests: the test of faith, the test of stoicism, and the test of the warrior. And then, because of their desperation, they couldn't afford to be giving up experienced sisters to the status of Repentia, so instead what they did was they offered those women who couldn't pass all 3 tests the opportunity to continue to join as long as they at least passed one but they had to join as a Repentia and fight that way. If they were successful and fought well and hard and acquitted themselves in a single battle and were still alive, they would be inducted as a novitate after that. If they failed, well, then they were died. But in this way, they were not causing themselves additional loss of women to the status of Repentia. And this is the tradition that the order continues into this day. The final decision was to keep everything at the status quo, and this was also to resolve disputes amongst the orders that had originally been there over who would get control of how many personnel added to their order afterwards. The ecclesiarchal authorities decided that a whole new order would be created, and it would be put under the Ebon Chalice as the most senior order. However, the Argent Shroud was allowed to develop a lot of its combat doctrine and also to contribute some of its teachings to the teachings of the new order. And then with remaining sisters from other orders that had completely different doctrines, the order quickly developed into one that, by commandery and then by priory, had differing approaches to combat. The order became very spread out, and this has further contributed to the independence of each priory and commandery. The reason that they're spread out, of course, is that they can recruit women of faith from pretty much anywhere in the galaxy, as long as they can pass the tests. The same recruitment policy remains. And in keeping with their original tradition, they still will accept sisters from other orders that wish to transfer to them. What they do not do is take any recruits from Schola Progenium. In fact, they're barred from doing so. This is a political sop to the orders minoris, who felt that the major two were essentially stealing women who had originally been assigned to them in order to give themselves a new order minoris. Color scheme of the order's armor is also developed to reflect this reality. Like I said, it's based heavily on the glowing chalice color scheme, which is befitting an order minoris of the Ebon Chalice, but with three main colors. The darkened silver represents the test of faith. The dark red is the test of stoicism. And the white, the off-white, is the test of the warrior. Now, there's two other major colors found on the armor as secondaries, and that is, the first one is gold, that is on things like their fleur-de-lis and their eagle symbols and a few other things, and that represents the Imperium, the Emperor, and then their weapons are in pure white, and that represents the purification the Emperor brings to the heretic, the Xenos, and the demonic. You may also see some black on them and a little bit of other darker metal colors that are mostly for trim or for accessories that don't have any significance. One other thing that the sisters do is that they whiten a lock of hair on the front right side of their head, regardless of what their hair color is. They have one lock whitened that is prominent and hangs down. Now, this happens even if they shave their heads. They're still required to have it permanently whitened, so if their hair does grow out, you can see it. If their head's shaved, then you just don't see it. If their hair is naturally white, then they have one lock that is returned to its natural color in its place, but this is pretty rare. The novitates are not entitled to wear the full colors yet. Since they've passed all the tests or succeeded at their trial as a Repentia, they are allowed to wear the three primary colors, but they do not have the white weapons yet because they are not yet fully trained and are not considered to be ready to fully represent the Emperor on the battlefield. The process of going from entry to full sister is overseen by the Dogmata. The Repentia superiors are their assistants who directly supervise the Repentia while they're in that status. But the Dogmata's main job, rather than policing the sisters themselves, is actually to identify and select new recruits and also to determine the fate of those who attempt the trials. And the women may come from all walks of life, but mostly they are women with nothing to lose. They're dispossessed nobles, often disgraced Imperial Guard officers or sergeants, and sometimes criminals or even gang members, something like that. As long as they can pass the three tests, however, they're determined to be faithful, tough, and skilled enough to become sisters. But if they fail any one, then they are offered the chance to continue as Repentia. If they fail all three, they're basically sent packing. They're not allowed to return. Now, this may seem like a pretty brutal method of recruiting. Only about 1 in 10 candidates pass all 3 tests, and only about 1 in 10 of those that don't pass all 3 tests survive being Repentia. So this is a pretty low level of success in getting them through. But for many of these women, this is their last chance. They are likely to be executed or face a very horrible fate in very short order in some other way. But this gets us around the Repentia problem that I described in the Dogmata and Repentia video. The Dogmata no longer breaks the Repentia. They still do have Repentia who have seriously messed up and become Repentia that way, but the vast majority are recruits. Now, the attitude is one of faith due to gratefulness. They realize that they were on the verge of destruction, or in rare cases, they may have been women who didn't really need to, but just felt driven to become sisters. But they have escaped what was likely to be a horrible fate. And even though they face a good chance of death anyhow, as warriors on the dangerous battlefields of the 41st millennium, they are going to face that in power armor with a bolter, which is still a better prospect than being executed as a heretic by some horrible method. They also have a very high degree of camaraderie because they know every other sister standard that they all prove themselves worthy either by passing the tests initially or by overcoming their failure under extreme danger on the battlefield. For sisters, they also just happen to have a somewhat Celtic flavor to them based on the planet Hibernicus, and just because I thought that was neat and I liked it. They are also closely tied to the Inquisition. They are a very good source of inquisitorial agents because they often bring in skills and knowledge from their background that Schola Progenium graduates wouldn't have. And they also have close ties with a number of Adeptus Astartes, most importantly the Salamanders, which of course I selected because that's the army I have, but they also happen to be in the area around Ryza and not far from Nocturne. They also have, again, going back to my army collecting habit, partly from their learnings from the Salamanders and Argent Shroud, and partly because they're recruited from the population, they're more protective of the average Imperial citizen than normal, and that makes them really hate forces that are out to terrorize and devour the individual Imperial citizen, often for the fun of it, such as Night Lords and the Drukhari as well. Their ties with the Inquisition have also given them some contact with the Shadow Keepers and the Sisters of Silence as well, although that's a more limited relationship there because the Custodes are so rarely seen. The Silver Chalice doesn't make a whole lot of use of these ecclesiarchal assets such as penitent engines, argoflagellants. They don't even use a whole lot of mortifiers, which are technically not ecclesiarchal assets. They're the equivalent of it for the sisters themselves. They also don't have very many crusaders or assassins, and when it comes to priests, they do have Minotaurian priests along, but they are also kind of a haven for those priests who maybe don't get along with their peers as much. This also, from a gameplay standpoint, allows me to play them as I like, because I like to play them. Sometimes I like to play them as Bloody Rose, sometimes as Ebon Chalice, sometimes as Argent Shroud. Rare occasions, I think I've used Valorous Heart. Never used Sacred Rose. I don't think I've ever used Martyred Lady yet, although I kind of do want to because I want to try out their Relic Inferno pistol at some point. And then I have my custom traits that I like, and I like the one that gives the Argent Shroud rerolls with the -1 AP and melee. I find that's a good combination. It works well with the smash or slash canonist that I described in the slash canonist video a few days ago. So that's what my custom order looks like, and I hope that it's inspirational to you for creating your own orders or your own armies that are maybe custom and a little bit different from the beaten path. Thanks a lot for listening, and hope to see you back here again at Wilderness Wargaming very soon. Once again, please remember to like, subscribe, comment, and click the notifications bell. And thanks very much.